Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Set the Line podcast. As always, I'm Sam Calder, joined by the ultimate setter of the line himself, Braden Riley Hoover. Folks, welcome to February and welcome to baseball season. This is going to be our first episode covering baseball on the channel this baseball season. It's good to be back, Braden.
Oh, it absolutely is. I'm very excited for it. Last year, for no particular reason, the AL East episode is our second most viewed or listened to episode of all time. I don't get it. It wasn't like our first, it was kind of like 15th or 20th or something, but it spiked. Hopefully, it does again this year.
Before we dive in to the AL East, which is going to be the division we're covering today, there was a big trade that went down in baseball last night, and it just so happens that the AL East was impacted greatly. The Baltimore Orioles, the first team that we will be talking about today, went out and acquired former Cy Young winning pitcher Corbin Burnes from the Milwaukee Brewers in exchange for infield prospect Joey Ortiz, who is ranked the number 63 overall prospect in baseball, according to MLB.com, as well as left-handed pitcher DL Hall and the 34th overall pick in the 2024 draft. Braden, big time trade here. What do you make of it for each side?
Well, starting with the Baltimore side, I really like this move. You bring in new ownership, and then literally within 48 hours, you add potentially the best pitcher in the National League the last couple of years in Corbin Burnes. He gets to go play in a very pitcher-friendly environment, especially out in left field after they move the wall back like 20 or 30 feet or something like that. You do give up a decent amount. DL Hall was a highly regarded prospect the last couple of years. Joey Ortiz, you touched on him being the 63rd overall prospect in baseball. It's a lot for a guy who's potentially a one-year rental, but I think with the ownership change, there's a high chance that Corbin Burnes ends up signing an extension with Baltimore, and we could look at this in a couple of years as being an absolute fleece for the Baltimore Orioles. From the Milwaukee side of things, I don't hate the trade. They seem pretty determined to move Corbin Burnes. Didn't want to give him a long-term deal. So if you're going to do that, you might as well get a solid return. Both Hall and Ortiz are solid players. They're going to be contributors within probably the next year or two. And I think it's an underwhelming return compared to what you could have gotten maybe a season and a half ago or even last offseason, or even last year during the season. But it's a move that they probably had to make. So I would give Baltimore an A minus for this one, which becomes an A plus if they extend Burnes. Milwaukee, I'd give them a B minus.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the last part you said, too, about how this could have potentially been even more, if they move him last year. I think for where they're at now, obviously Burnes and the Brewers' relationship was a little strained after that arbitration deal last year where it sounds like things did not go as planned for either side. So there was certainly some love lost on that end. But I think, you're able to go out, able to get a solid infield prospect in Joey Ortiz. And the Brewers' infield is certainly nothing spectacular. So I think he's a guy that could contribute right away. DL Hall, a great left-handed prospect, has been for a few years now. And you get a high draft pick as well. So I think, there's no guarantee that those prospects are going to pan out by any means. But I think you certainly could have gotten a much worse return. And then obviously Corbin Burnes is one of the best pitchers in baseball. And so if you're able to extend him to a long-term deal, that's just a fantastic move for Baltimore. I think it's a good trade for each side. I would certainly give Baltimore an A. I think they definitely won the trade, being that they get the star pitcher that is going to perform. But I do like the return for the Brewers as well. So I would give them probably a B, B plus maybe. But as for today's episode, we are back with our AL East divisional preview. We're going to get things started with the Baltimore Orioles. And before we talk about any players in particular, Braden, I will let you read off their projected starting lineup.
Sure thing. It's very similar to last year's iteration. You got Adley Rutschman behind the plate, Ryan O'Hearn and Ryan Mountcastle pretty much splitting first base duties. Mountcastle's going to be DHing a lot as well. You'd have to think it's some sort of platoon split with first base. Jordan Westberg will be the starting second baseman most of the year. Jackson Holliday, I don't know if he's going to be on the major league roster day one of the season, but should play there for most of the year. They also have Jorge Mateo, and then Gunnar Henderson at third base to round out the infield. In the outfield, you have Austin Hayes in left, Cedric Mullins in center, and Anthony Santander in right. Might see a decent amount of Heston Kjerstad as well. He could also potentially be a year away. And then at DH, probably going to be some combination of Mountcastle, Kjerstad, and just giving other guys days off in between. In the starting rotation, you have Corbin Burnes, Kyle Bradish, Dean Kramer, Grayson Rodriguez, and John Means. Out of the bullpen, you have Yenier Cano, Craig Kimbrell, and Danny Colombe as the three like main focus players.
And let's go ahead and get things started with the man we were just talking about in Corbin Burnes. Now, before we dive in too deep, I do want to clarify. We did impact players like this last year, except this year we're going to be doing a little bit more fantasy oriented, being the fantasy sports nerd that I am. I've gone through and I've done my top 200 fantasy rankings for category leagues and my top 95 at the moment for points leagues. That's still a work in progress. But I'm going to go through and share how I have each guy ranked, and then kind of talk about their fantasy value, and how I think they're going to be this coming season. And then I'll kick it over to Braden afterwards. So getting things started with Corbin Burnes, I have him ranked number 22 in categories leagues, number 21 in points formats. Not every guy is going to be that close. It just so happens that Corbin Burnes and the next guy that we talk about, and Gunnar Henderson, are both very similar ranked in each league. Corbin Burnes, he's a stud. And, last year got off to a bit of a shaky start, had a ERA just under 4 in the first half of the season, but then came back to the Corbin Burnes that we know, and had a 2.71 ERA in the second half. The StatCast metrics are what you expect from Corbin Burnes. Had a 96th percentile in pitching run value. His expected ERA was 3.38, which is very, very good. He's not going to strike out a ton of guys in comparison to what you see from, Pablo Lopez, Garrett Cole, Spencer Strider, the top tier of strikeout pitchers. His strikeout percentage was down last year considerably, about 5% from where it's been in recent years. But I mean, Corbin Burnes is still somebody that you have to draft as a top 5 pitcher in fantasy. Has gone over 200 innings in 2022, was at 193 and 2/3 last year. So he's going to be going out there and just getting 6-7 innings a start. There's really not a whole lot to dislike about Corbin Burnes, especially now that he's at a more pitcher-friendly park.
Yeah, I wasn't super high on Burnes. While he was projected to be with Milwaukee, my outlook has significantly improved for his fantasy potential this year after the trade yesterday. I don't know exactly where I'd have him ranked right now. I just kind of do it off of vibes. I don't have a ranking list most years. But I think that's a reasonable spot for him. Corbin Burnes is a guy who's going to have maybe one or two bad starts over the course of the year, but for the most part is very, very consistent, with the first half of last year being an aberration to the rest of his career, essentially. So I'm expecting somewhere in the low threes ERA wise, probably just around 1.0 for a whip. Could be give or take maybe zero point 0.1 on each side. He's going to be in Cy Young contention for sure. I'd be shocked if he's not top 10. I think it's very likely he's top 5 in AL Cy Young voting, and I think he's due for a great year.
As for Gunnar Henderson, I have him ranked at 31 in categories leagues, 32 in points leagues. A rookie last year was very, very good. 28 home runs, 82 RBIs, 100 runs, and 150 games played. He can hit for power. He hits for contact. He hits the ball very, very hard. A 346 xWOBA was 74th percentile, and a 92 mile per hour exit velocity is top 10% in all of baseball. And being in a very, very good Orioles lineup, I think he's projected to slot in the 3 spot, right behind Adley Rutschman and probably right in front of Anthony Santander or Ryan Mountcastle, 2 guys that are very, very powerful hitters. He should have a lot of run and RBI opportunities, and I would expect that as he continues to develop and get better, his batting average will go up, I think. And his 261 expected batting average last year is pretty solid. So if you're able to get him kind of right behind that top tier of third baseman, I think that's a good value.
Yeah, I think with Gunnar Henderson, there's a decent chance his kind of prospect pedigree and how well he performed last year pushes him up the board a little too high for me fantasy wise. Obviously, I think real life wise, he's going to be a great player for Baltimore for years to come. Should have an excellent year this year. However, I tend to stay away for the most part from second year guys in the MLB who had a good but not like otherworldly rookie season. Gunnar Henderson was a very, very solid MLB player. Won Rookie of the Year last year, of course. But it's not like he was on Corbin Carroll's level necessarily. So I don't think it's quite worth paying the price at that point. Although if he falls, I am scooping him up for sure. There's going to be probably somewhat of a sophomore slump to begin the year. However, I think as the season goes on, he will have no problem figuring it out.
And the one thing that I forgot to mention with Gunnar Henderson, and another reason that I have him as high as I do, he will have both third base and shortstop eligibility. So you'll get a little bit of positional versatility with him, which is always nice to have in fantasy. The next guy we got to talk about is the best catcher in baseball, in my opinion, and the best catcher in fantasy, and that is Adley Rutschman. I have him number 43 in categories leagues and number 34 in points leagues, which is, I believe, ahead of the consensus. But I mean, looking at his stats last year, 20 homers, 31 doubles, 84 runs, 80 RBIs, had 92 walks compared to 101 strikeouts. That is elite, especially from a guy who's as young as he is. His expected batting average was 292, 15 points ahead of where it actually was. And his xWOBA was 373, which was 93rd percentile. He does really everything you want. And part of the reason that I have him so high is after Adley Rutschman, there is a considerably large drop in catcher value. And so I think it's kind of like a Travis Kelce situation in fantasy football, where if you're able to get a guy like Adley Rutschman, who is head and shoulders, in my opinion, above any other catcher that you're going to be able to get, that's worth reaching for a little bit.
Yeah, and catcher's always positioned in fantasy baseball where there's so few guys who are just complete game changers. It's really a case of either am I going to take this catcher above where he probably should go compared to players that aren't catchers, or am I going to completely punt the position and end up kind of just platooning and picking up guys as the season goes along? I think Adley Rutschman, I see a lot of Joe Mauer in him. He's got that switch hit ability as well, which is super, super clutch to have. Um, I think it is absolutely worth paying the premium for Adley Rutschman because at that point, you're rostering one catcher the entire season. There is no reason to draft a backup catcher. He's going to be playing pretty much every day, barring injury. I think that Adley Rutschman is 100% worth the fantasy draft pick.
And then rounding things out here with a couple more Baltimore starting pitchers in Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish. I have Kyle Bradish at 93 in a categories league. I have Grayson Rodriguez at 83. And then in a points league, I have them back to back. I have Grayson Rodriguez at 78 and Kyle Bradish at 79. Looking at Kyle Bradish's numbers, he was a sub-3 ERA last season. His expected ERA was much closer to 3.8. I would expect, something in between the two of those this year, but he's a guy who in the minors had never gone above like 103, I think, innings pitched. So for that reason, I'm a little more hesitant on him in a points league. But I mean, in a categories league, he's going to give you a good ERA, a good whip, not elite strikeouts by any means, but he's in a good enough lineup in a good enough pitcher's park where, the stats should be there. He should get plenty of wins, plenty of run support. And then for Grayson Rodriguez, I'm a little bit higher on him for the reason that, well, he did struggle in the first half of the season. He was sensational once he got called back up from the minor leagues. In the second half of the season, had a sub-3 ERA. I don't know the exact ERA that it was. Let me pull it up here. 2.58 ERA in the second half of the season over 76 and two-thirds innings pitched. I think that's probably going to be closer to what we see than the 7.35 ERA that he had in the first half of the season. And for a guy who throws very hard, has a lot of good swing and miss pitches, I think he's worth the gamble. So I'm very high on both of these guys. But I think if I had to take one, I would probably go with Rodriguez.
Yeah, I would as well. I think this really depends on the situation of kind of team construction and also kind of risk management. With Kyle Bradish, you're getting basically a pitcher who's surely going to be in the low to mid threes ERA wise, not going to post gaudy strikeout numbers, not going to walk a ton of batters. And then with Grayson Rodriguez, complete opposite end of the spectrum. I would not be shocked if he has an ERA under 3, would not be shocked if he has an ERA over 5. Going to get quite a few strikeouts, should walk a lot of batters. So this really, to me, comes down to the rest of my team. Am I building a staff that's going to be in categories league, able to lock down that ERA spot and the whip spot, and I can afford to take chances on strikeouts? Or do I need kind of a stabilizer? So I would lean Rodriguez, all else being equal, but I think it basically 99% of the time is going to come down to which one's the better fit.
Well said. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. As for some strengths and weaknesses of this Baltimore Orioles team, I'll go ahead and get things started with what I believe their biggest strength is, and that is the elite level prospects behind the proven studs. We talked about Corbin Burns, Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Grayson Rodriguez, and Kyle Bradish already. But you've got guys like Jackson Holliday, who we'll talk about here later, Kobe Mayo. Both those guys are top 30 prospects in the entire league that could get very early action in the infield. Then you got guys like Colton Cowser and Heston Kierstad, who you brought up earlier in the episode, who both got to the MLB last year and are both top 35 prospects in the outfield. Baltimore has kind of created a monster with all the talent that they have and all of the young talent that they still have in the minors that is yet to be developed. So I think, just if some, not even all of these guys are what people expect them to be, I think this could be a team that runs the AL East for several years to come.
Yeah, I think so too. I think to me, they seem the most like complete long term within the AL East. There is really no impactful player on this team, with the exception of now Corbin Burns, who can leave of their own free will within the next like couple of years. They have a core locked in for the like foreseeable, not just near future, like long term future, which very few teams do. The Orioles are in probably the best situation in baseball right now.
And Braden, what do you see the biggest weakness of this Orioles team being?
If I had to nitpick with one of the weaknesses for the Orioles, it would be the bullpen. Behind Yanier Cano, there's no Orioles reliever I really can 100% trust. Craig Kimbrell had a very poor peripheral season last year. High walk rate, high barrel rate, high hard hit rate allowed. Did have a low ground ball rate, which is not good either. All of those below or at the 25th percentile. And he got big money to be the Orioles closer. So I'm not sure how that's going to go. He could have a season where he kind of outperforms his peripherals like he did last year, but the underlying metrics, they're called predictive metrics for a reason, so I would be a little bit skeptical. Then you have Danny Colombe, who had a very nice breakout campaign in 2023, kind of flew under the radar. I think he had a sub 3 ERA, but now he's going into his age 34 season, has little to no velocity compared to most relievers. He tops out at around 91. So will that catch up to him as kind of teams have more film on him? Who really knows? And then additionally, the other reliever worth mentioning would be Dylan Tate. Forced a ton of ground balls last season. He was 97th percentile in ground ball rate, I believe. But he doesn't get guys to strike out or whiff too often. So you got to wonder if that's sustainable, if those numbers are going to catch up to him, and if he starts allowing more fly balls, are those going to leave the park? And late in games, you can't have that. So I think if the Orioles can maintain a solid lead for most of the game, they should be fine. But if they're tied, if they're up 1 run, if they're down 1 run, I would be a little bit concerned until you get to Yannick Cano.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Craig Kimbrell worries me a little bit less, maybe, but he's still somebody who, in years past has been all but consistent. And like you mentioned, gives up a lot of hard contact, walks a lot of guys, and does not give up many ground balls. So certainly some reasons to be concerned there. But then, yeah, Yenny or Cano is one of the best setup guys in baseball. So he's a proven stud. You can feel good about him. But yeah, after that, I would agree. It's a little bit thinner than you would like, especially for a team that's as talented as Baltimore is.
Yeah, and
So
I
it'll
would
be
expect
interesting to
their
see.
contention to add a reliever at the deadline as well. So they're probably not done team building if they're going to be as good as they were last year.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say. Great minds think alike there.
Sorry to step on your
But
toes.
there you go. But yeah, as for some breakout players, I'll go ahead and get things started with probably the easiest pick I could have possibly made here. And that's going to be Jackson Holliday, the number one prospect in baseball, so didn't have to think too hard on it. And he's projected to be their opening day shortstop as a 20-year-old. And in Double A last year, hit 338 with a 421 on base percentage and a 507 slugging percentage at 19 years old. That is almost unheard of. He's not a super powerful guy. Had, I think, just 12 homers in the minors last year, but had 51 extra base hits, 75 RBIs, 113 runs in 125 games. Gets a lot of walks. He'll strike out a good bit, but his walks more than make up for it. And he's pretty quick as well at 24 stolen bases. So while there might be some growing pains, being that he's a 20-year-old starting at shortstop on one of the best teams in baseball, I think there's a lot to like for Jackson Holliday for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I think there's really nothing to dislike about Jackson Holiday. He should be the runaway AL Rookie of the Year favorite going into the year. I don't know if betting odds are posted for that or not yet, but I'd assume whenever they are, he'll be number one in the American League, and for good reason. I'm going to go with another guy who I think could potentially be the AL Rookie of the Year this year, and go with Heston Kjerstad, who you previously mentioned. A lot of the underlying metrics loved him from last year in his limited time in the MLB. Had a 363 x WOBA, which is like 80th percentile. Average exit velo, super high. Expected slugging percentage, almost in the 99th percentile. Hard hit percentage was really good at 55%. Barrel percentage 20%. All of those numbers point to a lot of home runs in the future. And at Camden Yards, going to be a little bit tough to do that if you're batting right-handed, but batting left-handed, very much easier.
And yeah, his minor league stats were great too. I mean, hit over 300 in the minors last season, hit over a 900 OPS, and a 376 on base percentage. So yeah, he's somebody who, especially if guys like Anthony Santander or Cedric Mullins struggle a little bit like we saw last year, he could be somebody that slides in and makes an immediate impact. So I really like that pick. Moving on over to the second place Tampa Bay Rays. Braden, I will let you read off how they are projected to line up.
Sure. So Tampa is going to be running Renee Pinto out there at catcher for the most part. Don't love that, honestly. But beyond that, you've got Yandy Diaz at first base, Brandon Lau at second base, Taylor Walls and Jose Caballero at shortstop. Roughly a split there of about those two dominating 80% of the shortstop playing time. Isaac Paredes at third, Randy Rosarena in left field, Jose Siri in center, Josh Lau in right, and then Harold Ramirez and Jonathan Aranda are expected to be DHing. Harold Ramirez should be in the lineup pretty much every day. He might play in the field a little bit, but I think would mostly be the designated hitter. And then for the pitching rotation, you have Zach Eflin, Aaron Savale, who I believe came in free agency this year, or was he in a trade last year? I think he was a
He
trade
was
deadline.
traded last year.
Yeah. Zach Littell, Ryan Pipiote, who did come in a trade this year in the Ryan Glasnow trade, and Taj Bradley. Should be some Shane Baz action in there as well if he's healthy, but that is a big if. He has not been able to stay on the field thus far in his MLB career. Out of the bullpen, you have Pete Fairbanks, Jason Adam, Colin Poche, Garrett Clevenger. Very, very strong pen there. Sean Armstrong as well. There is not a whole lot to dislike out of this Tampa Bay bullpen.
And one thing that I do want to note before we dive into the impact players, their ace from last year, Shane McClanahan, will miss this season with Tommy John surgery. So I just wanted to make a quick note of that so there's no surprises as to why he's not in our impact players. But yeah, he will be out for the season. Getting things started with Randy Arozarena. I have him number 33 in categories leagues and number 59 in a points league for the reason that he's not elite when it comes to taking walks and striking out. Last season was certainly his career best when it comes to getting on base. Had a 364 on base percentage, which is his career best among full seasons. And his 80 walks is far and away a career high as well. He's not going to hit a ton of extra base hits, which is why I'm a little bit lower on him in a points league. But he hits the ball hard. He hits plenty of home runs, has great speed. It had 22 stolen bases last year, 32 the year before that. And is going to get a lot of run and RBI opportunity as well in a very good Tampa Bay Rays lineup. So not a whole lot to dislike about Randy Arozarena, especially from a categories league. But in a points league, I do have him just a little bit lower.
I think I would probably lean on having him roughly in the same spot in the points league still. I think there's enough around him, and he's shown that he can have that extra base potential. He hits decent amount of homers on a yearly basis. Doubles, I think, are starting to get back up there a little bit. Probably not going to go for many triples, but I don't know if the gap is going to be massive between those two leagues. It could be a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a ton.
Moving on over to a starting pitcher in Zach Eflin. Not somebody who in years past you would have expected to see here in this range, but I have him at number 79 in a categories league and number 66 in a points league. He was one of the top 4 pitchers in terms of expected ERA last season, and I believe his expected ERA was around 306. I'm going to pull that up right now so I can confirm. But in 177 and 2/3 innings, had a 3.5 ERA, 186 strikeouts, and this Tampa Bay Rays team is consistently one of the best when it comes to developing pitchers. And yeah, Zach Eflin had a 3.02 expected ERA last year, at a 3.4% walk percentage, which was 99th percentile. That is elite. And his strikeout percentage was 26.5 as well, which is about 74th percentile. Yeah, 74th percentile. So he's a guy who I have a lot of optimism going into the season with. In a pitcher-friendly park, and yeah, like I mentioned, a team that knows how to develop pitchers and get the best out of them. So I think he's in a good spot to have one of the best years of his career.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Zach Eflin as well in the underdog best ball drafts. I've done a few of those so far. We've done one on the podcast. I know I've drafted Eflin in at least 2 of those leagues. I think he's very, very good value for where he's going right now. Provides a very secure floor. And the fact that he's had the strikeout numbers going up while being in Tampa compared to what he was doing in Philly, very, very good sign that that trend will at least stay the same, if not, even further extend his strikeout ability this year. I'm very excited and fully bought in on Zach Eflin.
Moving back on over to another outfielder, and that is going to be Josh Lowe. I have him at number 60 in a categories league, and he is the last player that I have ranked in a points league at number 95. He is exactly what you want when it comes to power speed. 20 home runs last year, 32 stolen bases. Those numbers should be very, very similar to what they were last year again this year, and had 83 RBIs and 71 runs despite missing about 30 games. So this is somebody who we're talking about with potentially 100 RBI upside and like 90 run upside. And you factor that in with the fact that he hit 292 last season with the power and speed upside that he has. I think he could be somebody that is a very good value if he falls.
Yeah, I think Josh Lowe is a very, very good value in category leagues, especially. Does everything well. Going to have the average, going to have the home runs, going to have the stolen bases. If you're playing in a league where you get points for walks as well, or I guess they have a category for walks, should be fine too. There is no reason to dislike Josh Lowe in fantasy baseball this year.
And the last thing that I want to mention with him before we move on, he hit 311 in the second half of last season. So certainly what you want to see going into 2024. The last guy that we need to talk about from the Tampa Bay Rays is going to be Yandy Diaz. I have him at number 108 in a categories league and number 91 in a points league. And you could easily argue that he should be much higher than where he is going. Had 22 home runs last year, 78 RBIs, 95 runs, and hit 330. And his expected stats would certainly reflect that as well. 383 xWOBA, which was 95th percentile, 305 batting average, which was 98th percentile. The only stat that he is below league average in is sweet spot percentage. But besides that, he is 90th percentile or higher in pretty much all of the important hitting stats that you look for in fantasy. He walks a ton. He's not going to strike out a lot. And despite there likely being some regression coming because 22 home runs was far and away a career high for him, I think that he's somebody who, especially in a points league, you can rely on to be a very, very strong asset for you. But the one thing to note as well, he will be no longer third base eligible. He will just be first base eligible, which does stink a little bit. But for a guy who's as good as he is, I don't. That's not a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think with Yandy, he last year, everybody was hyping up Luis Arias, but Yandy Diaz did what Luis Arias did while adding a little bit of power. And he scored more runs as well. He bats near the top of the Tampa Bay order, which knocks him a little bit when it comes to RBIs, because he's not going to be driving in Taylor Walls and Rene Pinto a ton. But as for scoring runs, should put up quite a few of those. It's going to be a very good boost for category leagues. Very, very rare that he'll strike out too. I think Yandy Diaz is excellent value. I've taken him in a couple of underdog drafts as well so far. I'm going to see if I can pull up where I've been drafting him at here. I think it's kind of late-ish. I don't know exactly the number I can find it, but I can't find it. Whatever. But I've been drafting him a few times. I think he's good value there as well.
Yeah, I've drafted him in a league or two of my own in those underdog leagues because I mean, especially with those how fast outfielders go, he's a great value late if you can get him as like a third or even a fourth infielder at times. So I love that pick. Moving on to strengths and weaknesses. Braden, what do you have as the biggest strength for this Rays team?
The biggest strength, I think, for Tampa Bay is their consistency. The Rays aren't really overflowing with star power outside of Randy Arozarena, but it's not a stretch to say that outside of Taylor Walls and Rene Pinto, who have terrible hitting that kind of just overcomes their elite defensive ability, it's not a stretch to say that nearly every other Tampa Bay Ray that's going to be playing a crucial role this season is at least above average. You have Randy Arozarena being Randy Arozarena. Yandy Diaz wins the batting title, gets on base at a ridiculous rate. Jose Siri, kind of a low batting average, but has elite defense, elite speed, has some good pop. Josh Lowe hitting 292, a member of the 2030 club last year. Brandon Lau even has regressed from going from a 140 OPS plus to a 113 OPS plus between 2021 and 2023. Isaac Paredes, since coming over from Detroit in the Austin Meadows trade, 51 home runs, over 800 for his OPS in the last 2 years. The pitching staff is going to give you 5 to 6 solid innings of two-run ball most starts. The bullpen is absolutely ridiculous. there is no reason not to like Tampa Bay.
Yeah, absolutely. The one knock that I have for them is the lack of a proven ace. This isn't like years past where you've got Tyler Glasnow or Shane McClanahan. The projected 1-2 this year is going to be Zach Eflin, who we talked about, somebody who we both really like, and then Aaron Savali. Both have been solid in their career, but never have they had to be aces. But as we've mentioned too earlier in the episode, the Rays are among the best teams in the league when it comes to developing pitchers. Zach Eflin, obviously very good last year in his first year in Tampa Bay. Aaron Savali was great in Cleveland before he got traded. Had a 2.34 ERA and 13 starts with the Guardians, and then after he came over to Tampa Bay in 10 starts, had a 5.36. So that's going to need to get cleaned up a little bit, but I have full faith that they will be able to. And then you've got some guys with a lot of potential who are very young as well. You got Ryan Pepio, Taj Bradley, Shane Baz coming back from Tommy John. So it's hard to find things with this Rays team that you don't like. But I think if there would be one thing, it would be the lack of a proven number one starter. But I don't think it should be too much of an issue.
Yeah, I think this Rays team is going to be very similar to years past, where it's going to be an elite regular season team, and then once you get to the postseason, not having an ace, a true ace, is going to come back to bite them a little bit. How much we'll have to see. I think it a lot really depends on how if Zach Eflin can kind of continue his upward trajectory. If he can, then maybe he can be their ace. But if he's able to only replicate what he did last year or regresses a little bit, it's going to be hard for them to have significant postseason success.
And Braden, who is your breakout pick for the Tampa Bay Rays?
For the Tampa Bay Rays, I'm going to go with Curtis Mead. He's Tampa Bay's number three prospect. He had a 2023 AAA slash line of 294, 385, and 515. Very easy to see why he's highly regarded by their organization. He had 278 plate appearances in AAA. He struck out just 48 times and drew 35 walks. In the big leagues, had 92 plate appearances, struck out just 7 times. Very good for a Rays lineup that at times is kind of boomer bust, with the exception of Yandy Diaz. You get a little bit more consistency with putting the ball in play from Curtis Mead. Not going to be a huge extra base hit threat. Had just 32 total extra base hits in 2023 in his 61 games in AAA. Had 5 extra base hits in 24 games in the MLB. But if he can be 70% of Luis Arias' contact ability while also drawing more walks than Arias, it's going to be very good for Tampa Bay as a potential 8 or 9 hole hitter and getting a guy who can be driven in by Yandy Diaz at the top of the order.
Yeah, I really like that pick. I thought about going with him myself. I'm going to go with Richie Palacios. He's kind of a utility bat, has played some second base, has played some outfield in his career. But in 32 games last year with the Cardinals, he had an 823 OPS, 6 home runs. He's not a super powerful guy. He had only 8 in 96 minor league games last year. But he excels at getting on base. Had a 379 OBP at AAA and walked more than he struck out. So that's very promising to see. He was projected to be the opening day DH not too long ago. I believe that is now projected to be Jonathan Aranda. I think Palacios is a little bit better personally, but either way, I think he should have a solid impact at some point during the year.
Yeah, and with the Rays, they have so many guys who are like roughly the same caliber, where if one of them goes down, you better bet that the other two or other three, I guess, like one of those guys is going to be seizing the opportunity and running with it. So whichever guy can stay healthy the longest is probably the one with the best outlook.
Moving on over to the Toronto Blue Jays, who finished third place in the American League East last year. Braden, I will let you read off how they are projected to line up.
Alejandro Kirk and Danny Jansen are going to be splitting time behind the plate, roughly a 50-50 split there. Vladdy at first base. Davis Schneider should be taking over the second base role full time this year. Bo Bichette at shortstop. Third base, kind of a mixed bag. It's going to be some combination of Isaiah Kiner Falefa, Santiago Espinal, Cavan Biggio, and Justin Turner, along with Aurelvis Martinez potentially. In left field, you have Dalton Varsho. In center, it's going to be Kevin Kiermaier. And in right field, George Springer. DH is going to be kind of a mix of all of the guys who have been previously mentioned, basically just getting off days. I think Justin Turner is probably going to be DHing the most. I would expect him to not play a whole lot of third base. He only played like 10 to 12 games there at third base last year with the Boston Red Sox. So he's my bet to be the full-time DH, if you can call it that, for Toronto. And then in the rotation, you have Kevin Gausman, Chris Bassett, Jose Barrios, Yusei Kikuchi, and Alek Manoah. Manoah is going to have to bounce back from a very, very rough 2023 campaign. If he can't do that, it's going to be probably Ricky Tiedemann taking over that fifth spot in the rotation. He's number one prospect for the Blue Jays. I'll touch on him a little bit more later. But for the bullpen, it's going to be Jordan Romano as the closer. And then you have Eric Swanson, Yimi Garcia, and Tim Meza as well as kind of impact arms.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into some impact players, and nobody more impactful than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Last year, 26 home runs, 94 RBIs, hitting 264, and his underlying metrics would indicate that he underperformed last year. Had a 295 expected batting average, 31 points higher than his actual batting average. His actual WOBA last year was 340, still pretty good. His expected WOBA was 375. So I think there's a large opportunity for him to have maybe his best season since his rookie year, where he had 41 home runs. But he's somebody who I really like in both formats. I have him at number 20 in categories leagues, number 29 in points leagues. The only reason differing is that I think pitching in points leagues is a little more valuable, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I mean, this is somebody who the power is going to be there. 26 home runs was a career low over the full seasons he's played. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement from what he did last season, and had 13 home runs over 68 games in the second half of last season. So I think this is somebody who has easy 35 home run upside, and in how dominant the top four in that lineup is going to be, that should lead to a lot of run and RBI opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think this is the best time to buy low on Vladdy. You're getting him after his worst season in a while. His reputation has taken a little bit of a hit in the fantasy community. Obviously, hasn't taken too much of a hit in the MLB community overall because he got the MLB The Show cover. But you see people complaining on Twitter about that, saying, "Oh, he had a terrible season last year," when that really wasn't the case. Maybe his overall numbers weren't, cover athlete worthy, but I think this year he's going to have a phenomenal season. I'm expecting 40 home runs, expecting close to a 300 batting average. He could be your fantasy team's MVP.
Absolutely. As for another stud pitcher in Kevin Gausman, I have him at number 27 in both points and categories leagues. And he's just rock solid year after year. 185 innings pitched last year, 237 strikeouts. He's going to work deep in games. He's going to give you plenty of strikeouts with that. His expected ERA was 3.85, but his FIP last year was under 3. So I would expect probably somewhere in the range of like a 3.3, 3.4 ERA, which you will certainly take. But yeah, the strikeouts and the innings are really the main selling points, especially for a points league, where you can feel very, very confident that you're going to be getting starting pitcher one upside pretty much every start you get out of him.
Yeah, and I think the most impressive thing with Kevin Gausman is that as he's gotten older, he's gotten better at striking hitters out. Usually you kind of see the opposite over the course of a guy's career, but Gausman has gone from a guy who was, a perennial 7 to 8 strikeouts per 9 innings guy up until about 2019 to going from like 10 to 11.5. Last year he led Major League Baseball in strikeouts per 9 innings at 11.5. So you're getting that. You're getting a guy who's going to be very good control wise, not going to allow a ton of unforced errors as a pitcher. So should have a very low ERA as well. I think Kevin Gausman is a no-brainer pick for sure.
And you mentioned Vladdy as a potential buy low candidate in fantasy. I think Bo Bichette is another guy that falls into that category as well. I have him at number 36 in categories leagues, number 39 in a points league. A 306 batting average last year, that's going to be the thing that you can feel the most confident in with Bo Bichette. But the speed is kind of why he's starting to get a little bit less valuable. This is somebody who 2 years ago was a first round pick, and then last year was a second round pick. Now he's going, late third, early fourth round in most drafts. But the power was down. 20 home runs last year. He had 24 in 2022, 29 in 2021. And the speed is definitely the main concern. 25 steals in 2021, 13 in 2022, and just 5 last season. I do think that this is probably the worst that we're going to get out of him. I do think that he's going to have, much closer to what he's been doing in 2021 and 2022 is what you can expect in 2024. But regardless of that, I mean, this is somebody who, despite a low on-base percentage, is going to hit for right around 300 every single year. So you know you're going to get a good batting average. He's going to have a lot of run and RBI opportunities at the top of a very good Blue Jays lineup. So I think it's a good buy low opportunity if he's able to fall a little bit to you.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a great buy low opportunity in categories leagues. Not as much in points leagues, I think. I think the fact that he just doesn't draw a whole lot of walks dings him a little bit more in points leagues. But all of the predictive StatCast metrics say that he had a phenomenal season last year. Expected batting average was somehow even higher than his 306 actual average. Had an expected slugging percentage of 502 compared to his 475 actual slugging percentage. There is a lot to like about Bo Bichette. So I think if you can get him in round four, you mentioned, would be a very, very good pick in categories leagues. In points leagues, I think it's still a good pick. I just don't know if it's as good of a value.
And then the last guy we need to touch on for the Toronto Blue Jays is going to be George Springer. I have him at number 117 in the categories league and number 94 in a points league. I personally am not huge on George Springer this year. The main thing that's kind of keeping him afloat is the opposite of Bo Bichette is kind of his speed. 20 stolen bases last year, but the power metrics and the hard hit metrics, they've just kind of gone downhill in years past. His barrel percentage has gone down each of the last 3 years. His sweet spot percentage is down. His hard hit percentage is down each of the last 3 years. And his quality of contact metrics have dropped significantly from 405 in 2020 to 332 expected WOBA this past year. He's not a bad pick, but he would certainly have to fall a little ways before I'm comfortable taking him. But if he does end up on your team, you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get somebody who's going to hit right around 260, 20 home runs, 20 steals, something of that nature with a decent amount of runs and RBIs.
Yeah, I'm completely out on George Springer from a fantasy perspective. Didn't have a good year last year, and that was even after he fell off from 2021 to 2022. In 2022, he was still a good player, had an 814 OPS, had 25 home runs, but it wasn't the same as his 907 OPS the year before. I think really the only thing that makes him fantasy relevant this year is going to be his stolen bases. I don't think he's going to hit 20 home runs. I think he might get injured. He's had injuries in the past, has been pretty healthy the last couple of years. I think he played in 154 games in 2023. I just do not see that trend continuing for a guy who's 34 currently, will turn 35 during the season. I'm not in on George Springer whatsoever.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that is a great point about the games he's played. 154 games in 2023. That is the most amount of games he's played since 2016. So it's not like he was playing in fewer games and putting up lesser numbers. No, he was playing in nearly a full season and put up lesser numbers. So I think that's a great point. And yeah, another reason why I think we're both slightly down on George Springer compared to years past. As for the biggest strength of this Blue Jays team, I do still think it's the top half of their lineup. The projected 1 through 4 spots in that batting order will be George Springer, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero, and Justin Turner, probably in some form or fashion. And I think all four of those guys have the potential to finish with an OPS at or above 800. After the top four is where things start to get a little dicey. And that's, one of the better top half lineups that you'll find in the MLB. All four guys are great at getting on base. And while there's some potential in the bottom half of the lineup, I think the top half is going to be what has to carry this Blue Jays team if they want to make another postseason run.
Yeah, and to me that really ties into the weakness for the Toronto Blue Jays as well, and that's going to be their outfield, especially hitting wise. You have Dalton Varsho, who last year was an elite base runner and elite defender, 95th percentile in base running value, 96th percentile in fielding run value, but his hitting woes negated nearly all of that. He was worth 12 runs fielding wise, 3 runs base running wise. Sam, take a guess at how bad he was batting value wise.
Oh boy, I don't even know if I'm going to say 4 runs.
Negative 19 runs.
Yikes.
Yeah, he has a lot of blue on his StatCast page, which is not a good thing. A lot of stuff below, the 20th percentile. Nothing above the 53rd percentile on there. His 220 batting average last year is due for slight improvement, up to 232 according to his expected batting average. Had an OBP below 300 last year. Toronto traded, I think it was Lourdes Gurriel and I forget his first name, but it's the catcher, Gabriel Moreno,
Yep.
to Arizona for him. Tried to move him from catcher to outfield. It was good defensively, but hitting wise, you sacrifice so much there. So that trade looks to be backfiring quite a bit right now. You have Kevin Kiermaier, who's basically the same thing, but was mildly better in 2023. Had a slash line of 265, 322, 419, but has much worse underlying metrics. There's a lot of stuff on his page where it's like 11th percentile, 9th percentile, 7th percentile in pretty key stats, like expected WOBA, expected slugging percentage, barrel percentage, sweet spot percentage, stuff that shows it's not going to be sustainable whatsoever. He's basically the same caliber defensively, with about the same level of offense or lack thereof as Dalton Varsho. And then George Springer has just completely fallen off a cliff. We've harped on it a little bit. I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth here. 25 more strikeouts, 100-point drop in OPS, pretty much, 4 less home runs, 6 more walks, in a full 100 more plate appearances last year than he had in 2022. He was worth negative batting runs, negative base running runs, and negative field runs. His contract is also very sneakily bad. He's due $75 million between now and 2026. Turns 35 during the year. I think that this outfield is going to be a disaster for Toronto, and it's going to hold them back significantly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And yeah, you mentioned the offense in particular, pretty decent defensively, but yeah, I mean, if you're not getting on base or putting runs on the board, you're going to lose games. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. My breakout player for the Toronto Blue Jays is going to be Davis Schneider, their projected starting second baseman. He's one of those guys that I was alluding to that have a lot of potential in the bottom half of that lineup. In 35 games last year with the Blue Jays, 20 extra base hits, 20 RBIs, and 23 runs, while slashing a 276 batting average, a 404 on base percentage, and a 603 slugging percentage. Very similar to what his numbers were at AAA. 43 extra base hits in 87 games, and a 969 OPS. He can run a little bit too. I believe he had right around 10 stolen bases. Yeah, 9 stolen bases last year. So he can run a little bit too. But I think he's somebody that the Blue Jays are going to need to be a useful bat if they want to have a chance at the postseason.
Yeah, there's a little bit of concern with Davis Schneider just because he started out so hot and then kind of came back to earth. But at the same time, his coming back to earth was still like above average MLB numbers. I would not be too concerned if I were a Blue Jays fan about Davis Schneider. I think he started off hitting like 400 over the first 2 weeks of his career. So you're obviously not going to get that, but you can get somebody who puts up, 280 batting average with potential for 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases. I would be happy with that as a Toronto fan. I'm going to go with Ricky Tiedemann as my Ricky Tiedemann. There's no R, I guess. As my pick for the Toronto Blue Jays breakout. Number one prospect in 2023. Not necessarily guaranteed to pitch a ton in 2024. Fangraphs only has him projected for 39 innings, but if or when he does, should be impactful right out of the gate. They have him projected for a 3.98 ERA with a .5 WAR. Not too bad. He's got very good fastball and slider. Changeup is okay. Needs to work on the control a little bit. Has kind of a high walk rate in the minor leagues, but if you can kind of fix that, he should be a very, very impactful pitcher from day one.
I want to pull up his stats real quick because I remember seeing his strikeouts per nine was like 16. And I want to find this exact number because it was just stupidly high. It was, okay, it wasn't as high as I thought it was, but 13.5 last year in rookie ball, 22.5 in single A, and then, yeah, 16.3 in double A last year. And still going to triple A, 13.5. So this guy is going to strike out a shitload of guys. And yeah, the walks might be a slight issue, but that's something that you would assume would come with time. So I love that pick there. Moving on over to the New York Yankees, who it feels weird to say they finished in fourth place, but they finished in fourth place. Braden, I will let you read off their projected starting lineup.
Jose Trevino and Austin Wells are going to be the catchers for the Yankees. Should be a pretty much 50-50 split there. I'd expect Trevino to get the edge in defensive situations. Austin Wells when they need bat in the lineup. Anthony Rizzo will play first base. Gleyber Torres at second. Anthony Volpe as the shortstop. DJ LeMahieu at third for the most part. We'll probably see some of Oswald Peraza and Oswaldo Cabrera as kind of utility guys for most of the season. Alex Verdugo should play left field the majority of the time. Aaron Judge in center. Juan Soto in right. And then Giancarlo Stanton as DH. We're going to see a decent amount of Trent Grisham as well. He's the fourth outfielder for the Yankees, but I would expect him to play, 100 plus games, especially if somebody gets injured. If Giancarlo Stanton gets injured, I think it's going to be Juan Soto moving to the DH, and you probably move Grisham to center and Judge into right field. So the Yankees have quite a bit of defensive flexibility there. and really just injury protection for the other guys. Last year, when Giancarlo Stanton had to play in the outfield, I saw the Yankees went 0-13 in games where he started and finished the game in the outfield. So, not a good sign there, and they clearly fixed their need there. In the pitching rotation, you have Garrett Cole, new addition Marcus Stroman, Carlos Rodon trying to rebound from a disastrous 2023, Clark Schmidt, and Nestor Cortez. And then out of the bullpen, you have Clay Holmes, Jonathan Loaizaga, and Ian Hamilton, who all had solid seasons last year.
Well, let's go ahead and get the conversation started with arguably the best pure hitter in baseball, in Aaron Judge. In categories leagues, I have him as my number 8 overall player, and in points leagues, I have him at number 3. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you all of the metrics that Aaron Judge was 100th percentile in last season. X-WOBA, X-SLUG, average exit velocity, which I want to say on this one for a second because his average exit velocity last season, 97.6 miles an hour. Just think about that for a moment. Barrel percentage, hard hit percentage, and walk percentage. Also 92nd percentile in expected batting average and 93rd percentile in chase percentage. I'm going to go ahead and say this now. If Aaron Judge plays in 135 or more games, he is going to win another MVP. He is, I think, the best hitter in the American League. And perhaps the craziest metric of all of this, his walk percentage was higher than Juan Soto's last year. If you're telling me that we get Aaron Judge's power with Juan Soto's plate discipline, that is the best hitter in baseball, period. So I am all in on Aaron Judge this year. The only concern with him is the injuries, but it sounds like the Yankees are going to be taking some precautions to make sure that he's on the field more. So I am all in on Aaron Judge.
Yeah, I think there's a strong case to be made that he should be number one off the board in both categories leagues and points leagues. Really, I think it's a toss between him and Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani would have the edge if he was able to pitch this year, but of course he's not. So I think I'm going to give the slight edge to Aaron Judge. I think you have Acuna up there as well, obviously. You have Juan Soto too. There's quite a few good players, but Aaron Judge might be the guy I'm going with at number 1. I think the craziest stat that I'm seeing, he had a 613 slugging percentage last year, which was very, very good. The MLB lead was, I think, Shohei Ohtani at 654. His expected slugging percentage was 712, which is unheard of. I mean, Aaron Judge had a 686 slugging percentage in his MVP campaign, which was one of the best seasons we've seen in modern history. I think that Aaron Judge has the potential to be, one of the greatest hitters of all time. We've seen that the last couple of years. I think this year he probably wins his second MVP to prove it.
And yeah, his expected slugging percentage was actually 6 points higher than it was in that 62 home run season in 2022. And his ex-WOBA was only 2 points lower. So Aaron Judge has not lost a step. And if he falls past like the 5th pick, it would be hard to not snatch him up in any format, regardless of how that's broken down. But another guy who is right up there with Aaron Judge is going to be Juan Soto. I have him at number 10 in categories leagues and right behind Aaron Judge in points leagues at number 4. I think him being at the short porch is going to do wonders. And him hitting 35 home runs last year, being at that short porch, I think he could get up to 45 this year. He was 75th percentile or higher in every single metric except sweet spot percentage, which for whatever reason has always been low. But again, I mean, 100th percentile in walk percentage, I don't know how that works with Aaron Judge. But 99th percentile in chase percentage, 99th percentile in hard hit percentage, had a 408 ex-WOBA, had a 284 expected batting average. Like, Juan Soto is year after year one of the best hitters in baseball. He's projected to slot in right behind DJ LeMahieu in the 2 spot in that lineup, meaning that if he gets on base, he's going to have Aaron Judge right behind him to knock him in. So it's very, very hard to not like either of these 2 top Yankees that we've mentioned so far. Very, very hard.
Yeah, I agree. Sam, I have a distinct memory of you from last year making a take, which you admitted it was mostly for the clip, but you said that Juan Soto was and had always been a little bit overrated. I think that we both agree at this point that that is definitely not true, but I respect you going for the publicity there. Juan Soto, I think he's going to have a phenomenal season as well. I think the 2 betting favorites right now to win MVP are him and Aaron Judge. I think Judge has a slight edge. But honestly, I'm tempted to place money on both of those guys because I feel like one of them has to win it. Even if the Yankees don't go super far in the postseason, this is probably the best roster they've had in the last couple of years still regardless. I think that they're going to have just monster regular seasons. You can't pitch around one because you're going to have to pitch to the other. it's going to be just an insane duo that we haven't seen in quite some time.
Moving on over to Garrett Cole. I have him at number 18 in categories leagues and number 17 in points leagues. He is my starting pitcher two in fantasy this year. And the crazy thing is that despite having a 2.63 ERA, a .98 WHIP, 222 strikeouts over 209 innings pitched, last year was actually one of the worst years that Garrett Cole has ever had. Pretty much all of his metrics, except for his expected contact, were pretty much career lows since he's gotten to New York, which is incredibly weird to say. But I mean, his expected ERA was 3.48, despite having a 2.63 ERA, and I think ERA is just kind of a hard metric to predict. But his strikeout percentage was down from 32.4% to 27% last year. And he's going to be 1 year older now. He's going to be 33. So it's hard to dislike Garrett Cole. And he's still my starting pitcher too. I'd be happy to take him at the end of the second round if he's there. But I definitely would have Spencer Strider, who we'll touch on later this offseason, ahead of him a good bit. And I would take plenty of these round two hitters ahead of him as well.
I think for a categories league, I would have an argument to take Garrett Cole over Spencer Strider. I think in a points league, you have to take Strider just because of the extra value that strikeouts is going to bring there. In a categories league, you can probably get slightly better production potentially from Garrett Cole at the other categories. I think wins is going to be relatively a toss up between those two. Strikeouts, obviously, Strider will win that one. ERA should be pretty similar. Garrett Cole might have a slight edge there, or Strider could. Honestly, that one's a toss up 50-50 for me. Whip, I think I would give the advantage to Garrett Cole, and then saves, obviously, is not going to matter. So I think there's an argument to take either one in a category league. I think I'd probably lean Cole just based on the price tag there. But in the points league, you definitely got to go with Strider.
And yeah, I mean, it's not like you can go wrong with either guy either. So you're going to get a stud one way or the other. The last guy that we need to talk about is somebody who I was very high on last year, and I will be very high on again this year, and that is going to be Gleyber Torres. I have him at number 80 in a categories league. Sorry, 81 in a categories league and number 80 in a points league. So very, very similar. Hit 273 last year with 25 homers, 13 stolen bases, and a 347 on base percentage. And his expected stats would indicate that he also underperformed. His 346 WOBA was 16 points below his expected WOBA of 362. I think the biggest improvement we saw from Gleyber Torres last year was the strikeout percentage was down significantly, went from 22.6% in 2022 down to 14.6% in 2023. With that, the walk percentage also went up from 6.8 to 10. So I think that this is somebody who is going to be right in the middle of that Yankees lineup, meaning that he's going to have a lot of RBI opportunities. So if this is somebody who is hitting around 270, 280, with on base percentage around 350, slugging right around 480, I mean that's going to be a damn good value to pass up on.
Yeah, I think I would pencil Glaber into probably the four spot in the Yankees order right now. I think it's probably going to be DJ LeMahieu, either Judge or Soto at two, and then the other one of them at three. So Glaber Torres is going to have an abundance of RBI opportunities. All three of those guys get on base at a very, very high rate. I think the runs are going to be a little bit less depending on if Giancarlo Stanton can stay healthy, if Anthony Rizzo can stay healthy. If Glaber gets hurt, I think there's a potential for him to completely kind of get like pushed way down the batting order. If Anthony Volpe is having a great season, but if he stays healthy, he's going to be a very, very productive hitter all year.
And yeah, the 90 runs and the 68 RBIs, I think quite honestly that could be flipped from where it was last year. I think he hit a little bit higher in the order last year than he will be this year with the addition of Juan Soto. But regardless, I mean, this is somebody that if in categories league is going to be bare minimum a four category contributor. Had 13 stolen bases last year. So if that number gets up to 15, 20, he'll be a five category contributor as well. So I think it's hard to not like Gleyber Torres given where he's going right now in drafts. But Braden, what do you have as the biggest strength of this Yankees team?
I think this one's pretty obvious. It's the star power for the Yankees, in particular, Juan Soto and Aaron Judge. We've talked about him at length, but I just want to say that this is the best duo in baseball we've seen since Shohei Ohtani and a healthy Mike Trout, which we saw for probably like 40 games a year, unfortunately. I think that you can make the argument that these two are better just pure hitters than those two even. So it's going to be very, very exciting to watch these two hitters. And then additionally, you have stars on the mound with Garrett Cole. You have Carlos Rodon, who was a star up until last year. Marcus Stroman has been a star at times in his career. And you have a little bit of the young prospect stardom in Austin Wells and Anthony Volpe. And then, of course, Gleyber Torres is a star as well. The depth is a little bit shaky. There's not a whole lot of guys who aren't starters on this team, or even who aren't, starters plus one Carlos Stanton that I would be trusting. Like Trent Grisham, I think he's okay. I don't think he's a phenomenal player, but if this team stays healthy, they're going to potentially win the AL East and should make a return to the postseason at the very least.
Yeah, it's a very star-studded team, no doubt. The biggest weakness, I think, is that outside of Anthony Volpe, this team is really not going to threaten on the base paths. He led the team last year with 24 stolen bases, and the guys who were right behind him in Isaiah Kiner Falefa and Harrison Bader are no longer there. Gleyber Torres is going to be the guy who was second in stolen bases now, who's still on the team with 13. The team really just is not built around stealing bases. It's pretty much just power bats from top to bottom. There's one guy who I'll touch on a little bit later here, who can run. I'm just not sure how much time he's going to get in the big leagues this year. But I think if there's a situation late in the game where it would really come in handy to get a guy that can steal second base, that might become a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think that would probably have to be an issue where they address it mid-season via either a trade or a waiver claim. I think a couple years ago they brought in like Greg Allen to basically be like a late inning pinch runner. I could see a very similar move this year as well for the Yankees.
And Braden, who is your breakout player for the Yankees this year?
I'll go with Austin Wells. He was the Yankees' number seven prospect entering 2023. Should be playing a considerable amount at catcher this year and potentially DH as well. Should Juan Carlos Stanton get injured. Um, he had very, very good predictive metrics: 373 expected WOBA, 283 expected batting average, 584 expected slugging percentage. Barreled up 14% of his plate appearances last year. Doesn't strike out a ton. He needs to work a little bit better on drawing walks. He only drew walks in 4% of his plate appearances with the MLB club last year, but I think that'll come in time. The issue with Austin Wells is that his defensive catching abilities last year were below par, to say the least. I think he's more likely to end up as a succession plan to Giancarlo Stanton at DH than a full-time catcher. Still can catch a decent amount, but at this point in time, he's just not very good at it. Needs to work on the framing a little bit. So if that comes, he'll play a little bit more catcher, but I think at the very least, you have to find a way to get his bat in the lineup.
And I will go with Jason Dominguez, who I can't guarantee that. I think he's their top prospect in that organization. I would certainly think so. Saw some MLB action late in the season last year, 8 games, and in those 8 games, hit 4 home runs. So that's a promising start if you're a Yankees fan. I mentioned earlier there is not a lot of speed on this team outside of Anthony Volpe. Jason Dominguez stole 40 bases in 118 games in the minors last year, had 37 the year before that. He'll strike out a bit, which is pretty common for a Yankees player, but his on-base percentage last year, or the last 2 years actually, was just under 380, so nothing to worry about there. I think Jason Dominguez is going to be a stud, and I think if a guy like Aaron Judge goes down to injury, I think Jason Dominguez would be a prime candidate to fill in for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Dominguez has been a guy who's been hyped up for the last like half decade, pretty much. I think he signed with the Yankees at like 16 and became their top prospect pretty much immediately. He's finally about ready to make it into the MLB scene. If he gets a chance, I think he's going to play very, very well.
And then moving on over to the final team we need to talk about, and that is the Boston Red Sox. Braden, I will let you read out their projected lineups.
They've got a three-way catcher split here of Connor Wong, Reese McGuire, and Roberto Perez, with the splits about 50-40-10 according to Fangraphs. Tristan Casas at first base, Vaughn Grissom at second base, Trevor Story at shortstop, Rafael Devers at third, Tyler O'Neill in left field, Jaron Duran in center, Wilyer Abreu in right field, and then Masataka Yoshida at DH. I think Bobby Dahlbeck is going to find his way in the lineup quite a bit as well. Should play a decent amount of first base, third base, DH a little bit. You could potentially throw him into the corner outfield spot, but I don't think he'll play a ton there. And then on the mound, the rotation is Lucas Giolito, Brian Bayo, I don't know how to pronounce his first name, Nick Pivetta, Cutter Crawford, and Tanner Houck, with a bullpen consisting of Kenley Jansen, Chris Martin, Josh Winkowski, Garrett Whitlock, and John Schreiber.
As far as impact guys go, there's really only two that we need to talk about. The first being Rafael Devers, obviously. I have him at number 19 in both categories and points leagues, and I think he's pretty much the only Red Sox player worth targeting relatively early in your drafts. 33 home runs last year, 100 runs brought in, 90 runs, and hit 271. His expected stats, his expected batting average was 282, and his xWOBA was 21 points higher than his actual WOBA, which means that he could be in for some positive regression in 2024. But this is somebody who, at a very, it's not as scarce of a position as it was last year, but third base is a pretty thin position when it comes to top end talent. Rafael Devers is one of the best hitting third basemen in baseball, if not the best hitting third baseman in baseball. So certainly, if he's there at the back end of the second round, do not hesitate.
Yeah, with Rafael Devers, the only reason he gets dinged whatsoever is because of the situation around him instead of himself as a talent. I don't think there's going to be a ton of RBI opportunities to go around. I think he's going to be pitched around quite a bit. He had a walk rate of 9.5% last year. I think this year that's going to be likely more up towards 12 or 13%. And probably some of it will be his doing, improving his plate discipline. I think some of it's going to be pitchers just avoiding him because there's no reason to pitch to him with some of these other lackluster bats in the order. If Trevor Story can kind of repeat what he did in Colorado, the Red Sox might be more of a threat. But until then, teams are mostly going to ignore Rafael Devers, and I think it's going to hurt his fantasy value a little bit, especially in categories leagues. I think in points leagues, he's still a no-brainer pick, but as far as category leagues go, I would be a little bit hesitant to draft Rafael Devers.
And then the other guy that I want to mention, somebody who I am much higher on than the consensus, is going to be Triston Casas. His ADP is 101 across all drafting sites. I have him at number 77 in categories leagues, number 87 in points leagues. Looking at his expected stats, the expected batting average was 253 compared to his actual batting average of 263. But his xWOBA was 370, just 10 points behind Rafael Devers. His xSlug was 500, which was 89th percentile. Had a 93 percentile walk rate at 13.9%. Is going to strike out a little bit, as will any young power hitter. But had 24 home runs last year, 65 RBIs, 66 runs in 132 games. And you mentioned teams pitching around Rafael Devers a little bit. I think Triston Casas is the reason why they won't, because I think Triston Casas is going to take another step up in year 3. He can hit for power. I think hitting right behind Rafael Devers is going to give him a lot of RBI opportunity, which is one of the reasons that I'm as high on him as I am. I think he's a great buy low candidate if he falls in your drafts.
Yeah, I agree on Costas as well. And you could kind of see what he did in the second half of the season last year. First half of the season was kind of a repeat of his rookie year, where he wasn't super great. And then I think it was around June or July, really started to figure it out. Last couple months of the year, that batting average took a significant jump. He hit 284 after August, and he hit 263 for the full year. So keep that in mind. I think Triston Casas has the potential to be a 300 hitter with potential for 30 home runs. Not going to provide a whole lot on the base paths, but I agree with you that he is definitely valued a little bit too low by the consensus sites.
And yeah, that's a great point you brought up with the second half compared to first half. First half of the season, in 77 games, hit 225 with 9 homers. In the second half of the season, in 54 games, hit 317 with 15 homers. If that is the Triston Casas we get, he will be going in the top 20 picks of drafts next year. That's a big if, though. Don't want to go that far just yet. The biggest strength of this Red Sox team, in my opinion, is there's a lot of breakout potential. I won't go into too much detail on this since we have our breakout picks coming up next year. But I think a very good portion of this lineup has a lot of breakout potential. You factor that in with getting a healthy Trevor Story back, hopefully a healthy Tyler O'Neill. I think this could be a solid team, but they play in such a good division in the AL East that I think their ceiling because of that is relatively low.
Yeah, you could make the argument for quite a few guys to break out. You could have the argument for Jaron Duran to have kind of an explosive season, Vaughn Grissom to finally capitalize on his potential. You've got some other infielders as well. And then the pitching staff is just a complete bunch of essentially guesses at this point of guys who could be good, guys with high upside who haven't really proven a whole lot. So definitely a lot of shots in the dark. And the Red Sox season is either going to be a disaster or a pretty solid one that kind of exceeds expectations. Sticking with that theme, I would go with their weakness as starting pitching. The Red Sox saw Lucas Giolito have a 4.88 ERA last year with a terrible second half of the season. 6 appearances in the Angel, 6.89 ERA. 6 appearances with Cleveland, 7.04 ERA. Hit a 4.9 ERA in 2022. The Boston Red Sox saw this and said, hey, let's give this guy a 2-year contract for $38 million. Oh, let's give him a player option for that second year too, just in case he's really, really good in year one and decides to opt out. That was, to me, the worst free agency signing of this year after they had the worst free agency signing last year with Masataka Yoshida. I remember when we did our free agency recap last year, we were like, how did this guy get 90 million? We were expecting him to get like
Yeah.
50 to 60 million. It's been a train wreck for Boston so far. They brought in Theo Epstein, maybe he'll be able to sort things out there. But additionally in the rotation outside of Giolito, you have Brian Bayo, who was pretty solid last year, but ever since coming up from AAA, has forgotten how to strike batters out. Predictive metrics think he's due for massive regression. His ERA last year was around, I think, 2.9. His expected ERA was above 4. I think it was in the low 4s at like 4.2. So he could have kind of a setback year this year. Nick Pivetta is Nick Pivetta. He's fine for, a fourth or fifth starter at a 4.04 ERA last year, but right now he's slated to be Boston's number 3. Cutter Crawford is the anti-Brian Bayo. Wasn't super great stat-wise last year, but the predictive metrics like him. Tanner Houck is a converted reliever who had a 5.01 ERA in his first full year as a starter last year. Not too great about him. Nothing about this rotation signals to me that they can make the postseason right now. I think there's potential, but it's not been realized yet.
And Braden, sticking with you here, who is your breakout player?
Well, I just harped on the rotation a bunch, and now this is going to seem a little bit counterintuitive, but my breakout pick is Cutter Crawford. His home run rate, his walk rate, and his hard hit rate all improved from 2022. His strikeout rate and ground ball rate improved from 2022 to 2023. His FIP dropped by a full 50 points. His WHIP dropped by 30 points. His ERA plus is probably the biggest indicator. Went from 77 to 113. Had an expected ERA of 325. Expected batting average of 208. Both those in the high 80s percentile wise. Gets a decent chase rate actually up at the 82nd percentile. Doesn't allow a ton of hard hits. He's in the 76th percentile there, as well as 75th percentile exit velo. Doesn't have great off-speed pitches, but he has a great fastball. Decent breaking stuff. I think that Cutter Crawford could potentially end up being the best pitcher on this Red Sox staff this year and for the foreseeable future.
Sick name for a pitcher too, Cutter
Yeah.
Crawford. That's pretty badass. My breakout player is going to be Wilyer Abreu, who is, I believe, projected to be the starting right fielder this year for Boston. In 28 games last season, he hit 316 with a 388 on base percentage and a 474 slugging percentage, 8 extra base hits, 14 RBIs, and 10 runs. Also stole 3 bases. His minor league numbers are pretty damn good as well. 22 homers in AAA last year, over 86 games. He didn't run a ton last year compared to years past, had 31 stolen bases in 2022, and I believe around 25 in 2021. I think he could be a nice piece in this Boston outfield, especially after they get rid of Alex Verdugo, and a nice piece that they could have for the future too.
Yeah, I think with Wilyer Abreu, it's worth taking the shot on this year. I can see why they shipped out Verdugo, even to a division rival in the Yankees. I think we can both agree that the Red Sox probably won't be doing a whole lot in 2024, so it's a good move for the future, in my opinion. You can at least develop him for a full year.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed. It's good to have baseball back, and hope you enjoyed our nice hour 13-minute episode. It's one of our longer ones in recent memory, but that's the beauty of these baseball previews. We get some nice long coverage, and we get real in depth with it. So hope you enjoyed that, and as always, we will catch you in the next one.
Adios.